Sons of the Forest is an intriguing game, a world fraught with pain and peril, secrets and danger around every corner, and a chance at survival available only to those willing to fight for it. Its predecessor, The Forest, amassed a sizable following and is regarded as one of the more polished and complete games in the survival genre. Yet, it didn't always look like this. It reached this state after 4 years in early access, a period of considerable teething pains and frustrating gameplay. But this is the norm for games of this ilk. Open world survival crafts are always a little bit janky, a bit rough around the edges. They're supposed to undergo at least a few years at the hands of the players before they reach their 1.0 status. Sons of the Forest wanted to skip this. This goal, however, did not come to fruition, and the game will still launch in a pre-1.0 state. Despite this, their initial ambition of leapfrogging the soft launch norm means the game delivered will be far more polished and complete than players typically expect. Could this game be the future of survival game early access? Using the tool to finish off the final details rather than actively building the game as players are experiencing it. Survival games have had a healthy following for over a decade now, and I'm sure, if you wanted to, you could trace this genre's ancestry back to some text adventure or ASCII titles. But in reality, there are two games that have created the building blocks that nearly all others would follow. The first of which is Minecraft, one of the biggest games in the world. Its loop of searching, gathering, building, and thriving is a genre staple. With its first iteration coming in 2009, followed by a 1.0 release in 2011, it only took a couple of years for it to hit a peak of popularity and player buzz. It quickly caught the sights of Microsoft, who bought the game's creator Mojang and the Minecraft IP for $2.5 billion. From there until now, Minecraft has lived comfortably in the mainstream. Millions of players have whittled away years exploring and exploiting the world, building and developing their hovels, hamlets, and habitats. And that's the more friendly side of the genre. Creativity is king, and it's less about surviving than it is about flourishing. Yes, the game has its dangers, but they're not too threatening. Not when compared to the likes of The Forest anyway. The sense of danger there comes from the DNA of its other parent, DayZ. Landing on the scene shortly after Minecraft, DayZ rose to infamy as a mod for Arma 2. It soon outgrew its shoes and players would flock to buy the game with no intention of playing Arma. They were there for DayZ. As countless other titles would later imitate, DayZ was set in a zombie apocalypse. Resources were scarce, the world was difficult and unforgiving. Survival was far from guaranteed and had to be worked for. Supplies will be scavenged, stockpiled, and spent each and every day as you try to outwit and outlast a zombie horde, as well as something even more diabolical: other players. Minecraft built itself a reputation as something that is enriched and more complete with other people. In DayZ, if you run across another survivor, 9 times out of 10, one of you will come out the encounter bruised, battered, and left for dead. But that is what players found exhilarating. It was survival. And whilst it and Minecraft both took very different routes, together they formed a foundation that hundreds of other titles would see. The Forest was no exception. Like Minecraft, it encourages you to explore, discover, harvest natural resources, build a base, become self-sufficient, and try and thrive. And like DayZ, it puts danger around every corner, makes vital supplies scarce, and leaves you alone on the peninsula to fend off a horde of mutant cannibals. But Minecraft and DayZ didn't just spring out of the mud one day. They took years of development, constant updates, and periods of evolution at the hands of their players. When you look at all the heavy hitters and highly acclaimed survival games that followed, whether that's Ark, Don't Starve, Rust, Subnautica, The Long Dark, etc., all got to where they are through a long period of early access. Some games seem to just stay in this state constantly with no 1.0 release in sight. Yes, I'm talking about you, 7 Days to Die. Given that most of these games come from the hands of somewhat green indie devs, that can explain this need for a soft release. But even experienced established studios take this same approach. Obsidian, who have 20 years making some of the biggest games around, from Knights of the Old Republic 2 to Fallout New Vegas, they also took the early access route with their stab at the genre. Grounded spent just over 2 years in early access and took on the brunt of players before it was released in its completed, polished state. And why? Well, Grounded, like all that came before it and all that will come in the future, essentially gave users a sandbox. You can play however you like, build in any manner you choose, settle as often and wherever you fancy. You can play any one of the infinite ways, completely to your liking. These games give complete choice to players in such a way that no developer can predict all their mad, ridiculous things their player bases will try and do, and the unexpected bugs and consequences caused. Even Endnight, with their proven pedigree with The Forest, thought they could step past it, which proved too much. Back when Endnight were first finding their feet, they were a tiny 4-person studio. Like all budding game designers in a startup, they had a dream of creating something ambitious and extravagant, which was, as much as they might not want to admit it, outside of their abilities. Initially at least. Coming at the time where survival games were popping up left and right, standing out was key. Endnight had something a little bit special that would help elevate their game, before they even started developing it. Their founders came from a background in film and TV visual effects. They knew a thing or two about how to shock, scare, amaze and appall their audience in the visual medium. This experience is definitely apparent in the game. Visually, it's enthralling, but also grotesque and unsettling. The world and its underlying cave systems are intricate and detailed, and the monsters that inhabit them are often downright abominable. Even in its earliest iterations, the game just looks better than its competitors. But it wasn't just the visuals that set the game apart. The studio knew their audience. They wanted to let a narrative unfold, but they also knew the draw of the genre and its sandbox nature. The ending, whilst encouraged, is completely optional. If you want to set yourself up as an untouchable king of the mutant folk without worrying about what's happened to your missing son, hey, you do you. Whether you play for the story or the experience, the game caters to all. Every game in this genre needs some big bad in one form or another, rather than yet another zombie flick. They design their threats differently. Okay, on surface level, cannibal mutants, zombies, they'll both try and hurt you, and then probably eat you. There's not much difference, right? But the fact remains that the enemies that will be a downfall in the forest are, despite their varying mutations, human. They won't blindly attack you on sight as a zombie would. Initially, they'll just watch you, study you, learn from your routines and your intentions, whether you're a friend or foe. If foe, they'll attack. If friend, well, they'd probably also attack, but maybe in a bit more respectful way. In the heat of battle, they won't charge in and nonchalantly skip over the dead friends. They'll try and rescue the injured, pulling them away to safety, showing human compassion. Granted, it's not all sentient as I'm making it all seem, but the fact is that the AI is very clever and just behaves differently to the blood-mad enemies in other survival games. It also gets the player thinking, you're the invader here. In some regards, you're the bad guy. You're traipsing through their home, hurting their friends and chopping down their trees. What have they really done that's so bad? Apart from kidnap and maybe eat your son, apart from that, not much. The Forest saw tremendous growth in its 4-year early access cycle, and if you play now, it feels great. But it got to that stage from rigorous play testing, bug reporting, and feedback from a passionate player base. And what the developers received from this process proved to be an invaluable asset, one that Endnight would eventually need to finish Sons of the Forest. Initially revealed in 2019, a year after the Forest's full and final release, the announcement came when the game was at its height of popularity. It was scheduled for a 2021 release, but fans wouldn't be able to get an earlier sneak peek. They wouldn't get to experience the game as it was being developed or input their feedback and reception. The sequel was staying very much with the developer, with no early access, open betas, or excessive player testing. The early 2021 release plan was too optimistic. This got pushed back to May 2022, and Endnight was upfront. The game in its state wouldn't have been ready. It would be unpolished, unfinished, and would have undone the hard work of building the game without an early access period. The game got pushed back again to February 2023. Those extra 9 months or so were what they felt they needed to get it to the quality and polish expected. But it turned out that the feat was perhaps too Herculean. Those 9 months wouldn't have been enough, and despite nearing completion, Endnight are clearly at a crossroads. Do they release the game in a state neither they nor their fans will be happy with? Do they delay it further? Or do they go back to their ambition and release it in early access? The latter option is the one that makes the most sense, Whilst it might sting their pride, it results in the best game and a fan base that's not left on the hook. The fact remains, though, that players won't be going into the experience with years' worth of development expected. It can be assumed that the finish line is in sight. N-Night has trod a long road in the dark, but those last few steps will be drastically easier with insights and support from their loyal fans. Initially, when it was announced that Sons of the Forest would release straight to its finished state, we thought that this game could be the future of the development cycle of the genre. Maybe early access could be skipped out and players could receive a finished experience. It turns out, we aren't there yet. Whilst this might not be the future, it is certainly progress. It's been the norm to get the first playable build, release it to the masses, and think about fixing and finishing it later. N-Night might not have followed through with their original goal, but the point is, they tried. They fully intended to see it through to completion. In the end, it came down to the view of their fan base. How many times should they push this date back further and disappoint the eager players who are just weeks away from the game launching? They could push a February launch back to July, but then who's to say July won't turn to November, which turns to next year? The fans may have been happy to wait a few more months, but that could be a slippery slope, one that N-Night doesn't want their audience to teeter above. But those final steps look to be a matter of finalising the game. Until a few weeks before release, we really thought they could accomplish it. Given more time, there's no doubt they could have. While it's not the explosive finish they expected, it's still admirable that they got this far. And despite not quite being the 1.0 game they envisioned delivering to their players, we hope the longer time spent in closed development sets a new benchmark for quality for games in the genre releasing to early access.